Hey there, this is Brandon Tilt, and I want to come on here to talk about various different topics. But before I do, just to introduce my counseling page. So, previously branded a Joyful Shadow Counselling. I am in the process of rebranding to a Feather of Light Counseling. And what this is based off of is when I was in my ayahuasca visions when I was in Ecuador. I had a ceremony with a Shuar shaman. So the Shuar are from the Ecuadorian jungle, and they're sort of similar to the Shipibo traditions in some ways, but also very different. I just remember having this vision where there were these feathers of light, giant feathers of light, and they were cleaning me and brushing me, and that was something I felt was very profound and something I take with me as an energetic practice. So that's where the origin of the feathers of light comes from. And yeah, I mean, this podcast is generally speaking about mental health, but more specifically, just want to talk a bit more about parts work. So parts work, its original brand, let's just say, like the original version that it sort of stemmed from, is called Internal Family Systems. So this was developed by Richard Schwartz. He is a family systems based psychologist who specialized in working with families and various other sorts, and then began working with folks with eating disorders. And as the result of noticing the language that his clients would use, they would refer to aspects of their experience as parts, and then he began to develop his system, Internal Family Systems, based off of using this parts language and seeing how these parts would respond and the ways to which he could work with them in therapy to help them essentially heal themselves and heal this system that needed more harmony introduced to it. I also want to, in some podcasts, bring more awareness to the topic of trauma and, maybe just defining what complex trauma is. And as someone who's experienced complex trauma, just talk about what my personal perspective has been healing that and actively healing that, and just really normalizing these more challenging versions of trauma that maybe many of us don't even really label trauma, and that's okay too. And obviously, plant medicine has been a big part of my journey, right? First, taking mushrooms and acid and various other psychedelics when I was younger, gradually beginning to do higher doses and even do them in ceremonial contexts, and then eventually using DMT as the smokable version changa, and sometimes as the chemically extracted crystal NN-DMT. Eventually even sitting in a ceremony with 5-MeO-DMT. And then once I was ready, moving my way towards the Amazon, where I sat with ayahuasca. And other topics that I hope to focus on, and will touch on in brief at least, is breathwork. And I use various forms of breathwork within my counseling practice or my coaching practice, as well as in my own personal practice. Maybe just talking about trauma releases more generally. I feel like trauma releases, sometimes referred to as TRE, therapeutic release sessions or experiences, or sometimes somatic releases. They come in various forms, some of which do require breathwork, some of which require practitioners, many of which are, I would say, self-led, or at the very least you can do them on your own. And just recognizing that these are ways to which you can activate trauma as it's stored in the body, and how talking about these things or going through visionary experiences is a very empowering and captivating way to first engage with some of this trauma. But there does need to be, oftentimes needs to be, a somatic release that follows, and will likely be more accessible within the weeks that follow a more intense visionary experience. Other topics I hope to cover in later episodes would be art therapy. So exploring different art therapy tools, my experience of using some of these tools, and just my own kind of thoughts around how art is used as therapy. And also just talking about the experience of learning about ethics, and as a counselor, what ethics means and how it shows up when you are a client in particular. And, maybe some ways that as a client you can advocate for your needs and really maintain an ethical practice, or even just sort of being able to recognize what ethical practices are within a counseling container. In a sense, just giving you an ability to gauge whether the container you're in is really serving you, or the counselor is really meeting what I would say are basic ethical standards that most counselors should have the ability to follow. Or even in coaching containers, really. It's not just about counseling spaces. I would say if you're working with a coach, just understanding that they ideally are also following certain ethical guidelines. And if they aren't, then as a client, you can maybe speak to those things, or maybe finding a different coach who has a different perspective and different lens. So this is just a bit of an overview of some of the things I hope to cover in my future podcasts. And it's nice to meet you. And if you're listening for the first time, I appreciate having you here. I'm just trying to create a space where I can dialogue about mental health and discuss some of my perspectives around counseling and sort of like, psychedelic integration, some of these things that I bring, some of the spaces that I bring clients into. And I'm also hopeful to do some future interviews and bring in podcast guests and just sort of discuss various topics. And so I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I will talk to you soon. Take care.